There's something awe-inspiring about faith, isn't there? The kind of faith that seems to defy logic and push past the boundaries of human reason. It's the kind of faith that takes Abraham out of his homeland, Moses across the Red Sea, and Peter out of a boat in the middle of a storm. Faith like that doesn't just move mountains, it changes lives. Today we're going to dive into what it means to step out in faith and trust God for the impossible, even when everything around you screams, it can't be done. Faith is a journey, not a moment. Think about Abraham. God told him to leave his homeland, his comfort zone, and go to a land that he would show him. Can you imagine the tension Abraham must have felt? Leaving everything familiar, not knowing where he was going? Yet, Hebrews 11:8 tells us that by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called. That's a powerful example of stepping out in faith without having all the answers. And here's the kicker. Faith doesn't mean you're not afraid. Abraham likely had moments of fear and doubt, but faith means trusting God more than your fears. It means saying, I don't understand this. I can't see how it will work out, but I believe in the God who called me. Actionable insight number 1. Step out even when you don't have all the answers. Don't wait for perfect clarity. Faith means trusting God enough to take the first step, even if the path ahead isn't clear. Now let's talk about the impossible situations. We've all faced them. Maybe it's a health diagnosis that seems beyond hope, a financial mountain too big to climb, or a relationship that feels irreparable. In moments like these, it's easy to give up, to throw in the towel and say, it's impossible. But let me remind you, God specializes in the impossible. Take the story of Moses standing at the edge of the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is behind him, the sea is in front of him, and the people of Israel are panicking. From a human perspective, it's an impossible situation. But in that moment, God tells Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." Exodus 14:15. And what happens next? God parts the sea. The impossible becomes possible when Moses takes a step of faith. Actionable insight number 2. When you're faced with the impossible, take the first step. Don't let the size of the challenge paralyze you. Trust that God can make a way where there seems to be no way. It's easy to talk about faith when things are going well. But what about when everything is falling apart? It's in those moments when fear and doubt creep in. The what-ifs can be overwhelming. What if I fail? What if God doesn't come through? What if I'm making a mistake? Peter faced this when he stepped out of the boat. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, but for a moment, Peter experienced the impossible. He walked on water. But as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the storm, he began to sink. That's what happens when we focus on the problem instead of the God who holds the solution. Actionable insight number 3. Keep your eyes on Jesus, not the storm. The more you focus on the challenge, the bigger it seems. But when you focus on God, the challenge shrinks and your faith grows. Faith also means trusting God's timing, which, let's be honest, can be one of the hardest parts. We live in a world that loves instant results, but God often works in seasons, not seconds. Look at Joseph. He had a dream that God would raise him up. But before that happened, he was sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison. It took years before Joseph's dream came to pass. And yet, through it all, Joseph never stopped trusting God. He didn't understand the twists and turns his life took, but he held on to his faith. And at just the right time, God elevated him to second in command in Egypt. Actionable insight number 4. Trust that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with yours. Don't let impatience lead you to doubt. God's delays are not his denials. Faith isn't passive, it's active. It's not just sitting back and saying, okay, God, you handle it all. It's stepping out, doing your part, and trusting God to do what only he can. Think of David facing Goliath. David didn't just stand there and hope that God would drop Goliath with a lightning bolt. No, David picked up his sling and 5 smooth stones, and with faith in his heart, he took action. and God guided that stone to bring down a giant. What's your giant today? Maybe it's a job you're scared to apply for, a relationship that needs healing, or a ministry God's calling you to start. Whatever it is, God is asking you to step out in faith and do your part. Actionable insight number 5. Faith is a partnership. You do what you can, and God will do what you can't. Don't sit on the sidelines waiting for God to move. Get in the game and trust Him to guide your steps. One of the biggest misconceptions about faith is that it removes uncertainty. But the truth is, faith embraces uncertainty. It's about stepping into the unknown, trusting that God will catch you when you fall, or better yet, carry you through the storm. Remember the story of the Israelites in the wilderness? God provided manna every day, just enough for that day. They couldn't store it up. They had to trust that God would provide again tomorrow. It was a daily act of faith, embracing the uncertainty and trusting God's provision. Actionable insight number 6. Don't fear the unknown. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. There's a man named John who lived this out in the most extraordinary way. He was a successful business owner, but when the economic downturn hit, he lost everything. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. His marriage was strained, and he didn't know how he'd support his family. It was an impossible situation. But John didn't give up. Instead, he turned to God and prayed, "Lord, I don't know how I'm going to get through this, but I trust you." And then he did something remarkable. He stepped out in faith. He started a small side business with the little resources he had left. It wasn't much, but he believed that God could take his loaves and fishes and multiply them. And God did. Over the next few years, John's business grew beyond anything he could have imagined. What seemed impossible became a testimony of God's faithfulness, all because he was willing to trust God and step out in faith. Actionable insight number 7. Don't let your current circumstances dictate your faith. Even in the darkest moments, God is still working. Trust Him to turn your trials into triumphs. Here's the bottom line. If you want to see God do the impossible in your life, you have to be willing to step out in faith. That means taking action, even when you're scared. It means trusting God when everything in you wants to give up. It means believing that the God who parted the Red Sea, brought down Goliath, and walked on water is the same God who is with you today. So what's your Red Sea? What's the impossible situation you're facing? It's time to stop letting fear hold you back. Step out in faith, trust God for the impossible, and watch Him move in ways you never thought possible. I want to encourage you today. If this message spoke to you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. What are you believing God for? What step of faith are you ready to take? I'd love to hear your stories and pray with you as you trust God for the impossible. And hey, if you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. By doing so, you're helping spread the message of faith and hope to others who need it. Stay tuned for more content on living a life of bold faith, trusting God, and stepping into the impossible. You won't want to miss what's coming next. So, until next time, remember, God is bigger than your fears, stronger than your doubts, and ready to move in your life the moment you step out in faith. Believe God for the impossible, and watch how He turns your trials into triumphs.